I need you to understand one thing before I tell you what happened with my neighbor. I'm still not sure if the thing I saw crawling out of his apartment that night was actually human. It started with a sound no one should ever hear coming from the other side of their wall. A slow dragging scrape like someone pulling their nails across concrete, but too heavy, too wet, too deliberate. I remember freezing in place, the TV remote still in my hand, because the noise didn't sound like an accident. It sounded like someone was trying to get my attention. And the worst part? I already knew my neighbor was supposed to be out of town. I don't mean maybe he left early, or maybe he came back early. No, he had told everyone on the floor he would be gone for 2 weeks. He asked me to collect his mail. His car wasn't in the parking lot. His lights were all off. His door had been locked all day. So who or what was inside his apartment at midnight? The scraping happened again. Deeper this time, like something heavy being pushed across a floor that shouldn't have anything heavy on it. Then everything went silent. Completely silent. That kind of silence that hums against your ears because the air itself feels wrong. And right when I thought it was over, I heard the whisper. Not a normal whisper. Not someone talking through a wall. It was right next to me. Inches from my ear. A voice so low it didn't sound like it came from a throat. It sounded like it crawled out of the dark itself. Do you hear it too? My whole body went cold. I turned around instantly, expecting someone to be behind me. But there was no one. Just my empty living room, dim, still, and suddenly suffocating. The whisper didn't echo. It didn't trail off. It was just gone. But the scraping started again. This time it wasn't coming from behind my wall. It was coming from the hallway. I didn't want to look. Every part of me screamed to stay where I was, to pretend I heard nothing, to pretend I didn't exist. But the sound was moving slowly, deliberately, dragging itself closer to my door. Something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too uneven for footsteps. Too heavy for an animal. Too slow for a person in trouble. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to move. Then the smell hit. Rot. Bitter and sour like old meat left in a sealed room. It seeped in through the crack under my door, thick enough to taste. I stepped back, unable to breathe, unable to think. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. All I could do was stare at the door and pray that whatever was outside couldn't hear how terrified I was. The scraping stopped. Silence. And then a shadow moved under my door. Not a foot. Not a shoe. Something with too many points, too many bends, like a hand stretched into a shape that should never exist. It lingered there, motionless, as if listening. As if deciding. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Every muscle in my body locked in place, waiting for the door to shake or twist or break open. But instead, the thing outside did something much worse. It whispered again, from right beneath the crack of my door, in the same voice I heard behind me moments earlier. He's not coming back. And that was the moment I realized something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong long before I ever heard the scraping. Before any of this happened, my life was painfully normal, the kind of routine that feels so safe you stop noticing it. My name is Daniel, I'm 29. And I work remote as a technical writer for a small software company. Not exactly the kind of job that prepares you for anything exciting, much less terrifying. Most days feel the same, and honestly I always thought I liked it that way. I live on the 4th floor of a quiet apartment building, just outside of Portland, Oregon. The place isn't fancy. Peeling paint in the hallways, old carpet that hasn't been replaced in a decade. But it's clean, calm, and usually silent after 9 p.m. The kind of building where you know the sound of everyone's footsteps, and nothing ever surprises you. Nothing ever changes. The night everything happened started just like every other night. It was almost 11:30 p.m., and I had just wrapped up a long day of editing documentation. My eyes were tired, my neck was stiff, and all I wanted was a little background noise while I ate the leftovers in my fridge. I microwaved my food, changed into a hoodie and sweatpants, and sat on my couch with a plate of reheated pasta. Nothing strange, nothing dramatic. Just the usual quiet ending to a quiet day. There was nothing on my mind except whether I should start a new show, or just rewatch something I'd seen 100 times. That's the kind of mood I was in, soft, lazy, comfortably numb to the world. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just there, sinking into my couch, fork in hand, letting the warmth of the food settle the last of my workday tension. My living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner and the soft glow of the TV menu. Outside, the streetlights cast their usual amber glow across the parking lot. I could hear the faint hum of a distant highway, and occasionally, a car door closing somewhere in the complex. All sounds I'd gotten so used to they barely registered anymore. Felt safe. Completely, absolutely safe. I remember glancing at my locked front door out of habit, the way you do when you live alone. Not because I was afraid, but because it was part of my nightly routine. Everything was in its place. My keys in the bowl by the door. My shoes lined up neatly on the mat. My mail stacked on the counter, including a few envelopes from my neighbor, Matt, who had asked me to collect his while he was gone. Matt was one of the only neighbors I actually talked to. He lived right next door. A quiet guy in his early 30s who worked night shifts at the hospital. He had told me earlier that week that he'd be flying out to visit family and wouldn't be back until the weekend. So when he handed me his spare key and asked me to check his mail, it felt like nothing more than a simple favor. I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about anything except eating, relaxing, and probably falling asleep on the couch like I always did. The building felt still, calm, predictable. Even my thoughts were slow, those drifting, harmless, end-of-day thoughts about chores I might do tomorrow, emails I needed to send, groceries I kept forgetting to buy. There wasn't even a hint of danger. No unease. No instinct telling me to pay attention. Just quiet. Comfortable, familiar quiet. If someone had asked me then whether anything strange had ever happened in this building, I would have laughed and said no. Because up until that moment this apartment had been the safest place in my world. But safety, I learned that night, is only safe until the first thing cracks. And I had no idea how close that crack already was. It began with something so small I almost didn't notice it at all. Just a faint irregular tapping coming from the wall behind my couch. At first I assumed it was the heater kicking on or maybe the pipe settling. This building was old. Strange noises were part of its personality. Still, I paused the TV out of instinct and listened. Tap. Tap tap. Then nothing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just strange, too controlled, too spaced out, like someone was lightly knocking with a fingertip. I waited, fork halfway to my mouth, expecting it to repeat. But the silence stretched long enough that I forced myself to shrug it off. Maybe it was just the plumbing. Maybe I was just tired. I hit play again. A few minutes later I felt a draft brush the back of my neck. Not a cold blast. More like the faint movement of air shifting behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, confused. My windows were shut. The AC was off. The vents weren't even running. Yet for a moment, it felt like someone had quietly walked past me. That tiny prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I told myself not to be stupid. Apartment buildings aren't airtight. Air moves, walls creak. Nothing strange. Except the room felt slightly different. A little heavier. Like the air had thickened without any change in temperature. Subtle, but uncomfortable enough that I sat up straighter on the couch. I tried focusing on the TV again, but the tapping came back. Tap. Tap. Oh. Tap tap tap. A rhythm this time. Almost like someone thinking about knocking but not committing to it. I muted the TV. Matt. I said without thinking. Then I froze. Matt wasn't here. Matt wasn't even in the state. I leaned closer to the wall, pressing my ear gently against it. No tapping. Just a faint hum. Like someone moving slowly on the other side of the drywall. But even that seemed impossible. His apartment should have been empty. I pulled away from the wall, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. The hallway outside, normally filled with the sounds of distant footsteps or doors gently closing, was silent. No cars in the lot. No muffled TVs from other units. Felt unusually still. Like the whole building was holding its breath. Something felt wrong. My eyes drifted to the shadows under my door. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very aware of me. Like I wasn't alone in the room anymore. I couldn't explain it. There was no noise, no movement. Just that creeping sensation that someone was quietly watching from a place I couldn't see. I got up and walked toward the kitchen, trying to shake it off. I stood there for a second, hand on the fridge handle, but I wasn't thirsty. I just needed to move, to reset my nerves. I opened the fridge anyway, letting the bright white light spill out and wash over the room behind me. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then I heard it again. Not tapping this time. A faint shuffling sound, like something dragging lightly across a floor. Coming from the hallway. I turned off the fridge light and stood perfectly still, barely breathing. Listening. Shuffle. Pause. Shuffle, shuffle. It wasn't loud. But it wasn't right. No neighbor walked like that. No pet moved like that. It sounded experimental. Like someone unfamiliar with walking was trying it for the first time. I stepped away from the kitchen slowly, keeping my eyes on the front door. I felt my heartbeat crawling up into my throat. Nothing happened. Nothing appeared. But the air felt different again. Thicker. Heavier. Like someone was standing right outside my door. Even if they weren't touching it. Even if they weren't making a sound. The building had never felt this quiet before. No threat. Nothing dangerous. Nothing proven. Just a growing certainty that something was wrong, deeply wrong. And that whatever it wasn't finished with me yet. The moment everything changed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a scream or a slam or anything cinematic. It came quietly, so quietly that, for a split second, my brain refused to believe it was real. I was standing in my living room, staring at the door, trying to convince myself that the shuffling sound I'd heard was nothing. Maybe a neighbor coming home late. Maybe an animal outside. Anything normal. Anything explainable. And that's when the hallway light flickered. Just once. Not a full blackout, just a single trembling flicker. Enough to send a thin blade of shadow sliding under the crack of my door. As if something had just walked past the light source. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. Because the shadow didn't move like a person's shadow. It stretched strangely, too long, too narrow, tapering at the end like a limb that shouldn't exist. It lingered there, impossibly still, before slowly withdrawing toward Matt's apartment. The heaviness that filled the air wasn't subtle this time. It dropped on me like a weight, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest, my throat, my ribs. I felt pinned in place by nothing more than the atmosphere itself. Something was in the hallway. Something real. Something wrong. And then for the first time I heard it clearly, coming through the wall. I'd been hearing the tapping from all night. Breathing. Not human breathing. Deep. Wet. Disjointed. Like lungs that didn't work the way lungs were supposed to. It dragged in a breath that rattled like loose bones, held it too long, then exhaled with a low guttural tremor that vibrated the studs in the wall. I stumbled back from the wall, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. My instinct was to call out, to say Matt's name again, to ask if someone was in trouble, but the sound stuck in my throat. Some primal part of me understood that if I made a noise, whatever was in that apartment would hear me. And it would come. I backed toward the center of the room. My hands shook uncontrollably. My breath felt tight and shallow. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was no longer imagining things. This was real. Something was in his apartment. Something that shouldn't have been. Then the breathing stopped. Abruptly. As if the thing had just realized something else was nearby. Me. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. A listening silence. A calculating silence. Then slowly, deliberately, something scraped across the inside of Matt's front door. Not at floor level. Not like someone dragging a foot or a hand. Higher. Mid-door. At chest level. Fingernails. Long ones. The scrape went from one side of the door to the other, slow enough that I could hear each individual ridge of whatever was dragging across it. Then it hesitated and scraped back the other way. My knees nearly buckled. Whatever was in there wasn't pacing. It wasn't trying to get out. It was feeling the door. Exploring it. Testing it. Understanding it. And then the worst sound so far. My neighbor's door handle turned. Just a tiny metallic click. But enough to send lightning down my spine. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. I was shaking so hard that my teeth chattered, and I clenched my jaw to stop them. Another click. The handle pressed down slowly like something was trying to mimic how a person does it. Even though it didn't quite understand the movement, something was trying to come out. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I wasn't dealing with a burglary, a break-in, or a confused tenant. I was dealing with something that didn't belong in this building, or in this world at all, and it knew I was here. The moment the door handle on Matt's apartment clicked all the way down, instinct took control. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I backed away from my own door, retreating into the shadows of my living room as quietly as I could. My breath came out in tight, shaky bursts, and every inhale felt like it might give me away. The air was thick, wet, like the humidity had suddenly doubled. My ears rang with the pounding of my pulse. I kept my eyes locked on my peephole. Seconds passed. Nothing. Then a slow creak. Matt's door opening. But not smoothly. Not like a door being pushed open by a person. It groaned, stopped, then jerked wider. Like something was pulling it with too many hands, or not enough control. I stumbled backward and nearly tripped over my coffee table. I froze again, crouched low, waiting for a shape to enter the hall. A shadow appeared first. Long. Distorted. Uneven. It stretched across the floor like liquid darkness spilling into the hallway. Then I heard it. The sound of something stepping out of his apartment. Scratch. Thump. Scratch. Thump. Not footsteps. A dragging limb followed by a heavy drop. It was coming my way. My survival instincts snapped wide open. I crawled quickly, quietly, toward my bedroom, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape before I could. Every movement felt unbearably loud. My knees brushed the carpet. My breath hitched. I closed the bedroom door behind me as slowly as humanly possible, leaving it open just a crack so I could still look into the hall. Then the thing reached my door. I didn't see its full body, only its hand. A hand that slid under the crack of my door just as it had earlier. But this time I saw it clearly. The fingers were too long, 3 times too long, thin and jointed in the wrong places, folding like soft metal. The skin was pale gray, almost translucent, stretched thin over bone that didn't match any human anatomy I'd ever seen. The nails weren't nails, they were points. Curved. Sharp. Clicking lightly as they touched the wood. Felt the surface. Scraping. Tapping. Exploring. Then the fingertips pressed upward, like it was trying to pry the door open from underneath. I clamped both hands over my mouth to stop the scream rising in my throat. My body trembled so violently, I had to grip the edge of my dresser to keep from collapsing. The handle of my bedroom door twitched. Just once. But enough to nearly send me into a panic attack. The thing was testing it. I crawled backward into the closet, forcing myself into the cramped space between boxes. I pulled the sliding door shut, leaving the smallest sliver open to breathe. My lungs were burning. My vision blurred with tears I didn't have time to wipe. Then the bedroom door began to open. Slowly. Silently. As if the creature was learning how to mimic silence. A shadow spilled in first, long and crooked, stretching across the floorboards and reaching the foot of my bed. Then another dragging step. And another. Something tall shifted in the doorway, too tall, too thin, barely fitting into the frame as it moved. The smell hit next. That same rotting, sour, suffocating stench that made my throat close up and my eyes water. It seeped into the closet, thick as fog. The creature shuffled closer. Right toward my hiding spot. Its fingers brushed the closet door. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap harder than the last, until the door began to slide open. I pressed myself into the back corner, choking on terror, ready to bolt, ready to do anything when suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. My front door. Something had slammed into it from the other side. The creature froze. Its head, or what I guess was its head, snapped sideways toward the noise. Another bang. And another. It hesitated. Then slowly, eerily, gracefully, it withdrew its hand, turned, and crawled back toward the hallway in a series of jerking, unnatural motions. I waited only long enough to hear it move away before I burst out of the closet, sprinted to my bedroom window, unlocked it, shoved it open and jumped. I hit the bushes below hard enough to knock the breath from my body. Pain shot through my leg, but adrenaline didn't let it matter. I ran, limping, barefoot, without looking back. Because I knew if I looked back and if it was looking at me, I'd never make it out alive. When I hit the bushes, I thought the pain in my leg was the worst thing I'd feel that night. I was wrong. The worst part came later. When I finally realized the horror hadn't ended just because I ran. I sprinted across the parking lot, limping, gasping, half delirious with adrenaline. The night air slapped against my skin, cold and sharp, but at least it meant I was outside. Away from that thing, away from the hallway, away from the shadow stretching under my door. I didn't stop running until I reached the far edge of the complex, collapsing behind a row of recycling bins. For several long minutes I just sat there, shaking uncontrollably, struggling to catch my breath. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every car passing in the distance made me flinch. I checked behind me so many times my neck burned, but nothing followed. No scraping, no dragging, no whisper creeping through the dark. For the first time all night, I felt temporarily safe. A neighbor eventually found me crouched on the pavement. An older woman who lived on the second floor. She asked if I'd been attacked, if someone broke into my apartment, if I needed an ambulance. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. I kept stuttering, shaking my head, pointing toward the building like a terrified child. She called the police for me. When the officers arrived, my explanation sounded insane, even to me. A creature. Too many joints. Crawled out of my neighbor's apartment. Dragged something. Hands under my door. They exchanged looks. I recognized those looks. The same look doctors give a patient when they're trying to be polite, but don't believe a single word. Still, they went inside to check. And that was when things only got more confusing. They found nothing. Matt's apartment. Door closed. Locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No scratches on the walls or floor. No smell. No damage of any kind. My apartment. A bedroom door intact. Closet door intact. A carpet undisturbed. Front door perfectly fine. No prints. No marks. Nothing at all. The only sign something happened was my window open, and the crushed bushes where I'd landed. One of the officers asked if I'd been drinking. Another asked if I took any medication. A third gently suggested that panic attacks can feel very real. They didn't say it out loud, but the message was clear. They thought I imagined the whole thing. Eventually, they took a report and left me with the warning to get some sleep and maybe talk to someone in the morning. I didn't sleep. I stayed with a friend across town for the next 3 nights. Every time a floorboard creaked or a pipe groaned, I jolted awake. I didn't step foot near my building until daylight, bright, blinding daylight. When I finally forced myself to go back, I found something waiting for me that the police had missed. It was on my doormat. A single long pale gray finger bone. Cleanly severed, jointed in the wrong place, like it came from something that never belonged in a human body. The bone was cold to the touch. And slightly wet. I called the police again. This time they didn't even send a car. They told me it was probably just an animal bone, someone left as a prank. They told me not to worry. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I noticed when I picked it up. My door, my solid, untouched, perfectly normal front door, had something scratched lightly into the wood. Something small, almost invisible unless the light hit it from the side. A message. I know where you ran. I moved out that same day. But sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I swear I still hear that tapping getting closer again.